There is a graveyard on a small island most Americans have never heard of. It sits on the edge of the Solomon Islands, a tiny tropical nation scattered across 900 islands in the South Pacific. The graves belong to American Marines who died there in 1942, fighting one of the bloodiest campaigns in United States military history. They were 19, 20, 22 years old. They came from Iowa and Georgia and California. They had never heard of the Solomon Islands before the war, and they died there so that a distant enemy could not use those islands as a platform to cut off the American supply line to Australia and threaten the entire Pacific. Their sacrifice worked. America won. And for the next 80 years, the United States stood as the undisputed master of the Pacific Ocean, the most powerful presence in the world's largest body of water. Today, those same Solomon Islands have signed a security agreement with China. The agreement gives Chinese military and police personnel the right to operate there. It authorizes Chinese warships to dock and resupply. It opens the door, according to the text that was leaked, for China to potentially establish a permanent military facility in the very waters where American boys died to prevent exactly that kind of foreign military presence. And here is the part that should make every American sit up straight. Most people in the United States have absolutely no idea this is happening. That is what this video is about. This is not a story about a single dramatic military confrontation. There are no missiles flying, no battles being fought, no declarations of war. This is a story about something slower, quieter, and in many ways more dangerous. The gradual, deliberate, strategic erosion of American influence across the Pacific, happening in the background of daily American life, in places too small and too remote to make the evening news, through mechanisms too patient and too sophisticated to fit neatly into a cable news segment. China is not beating America in a fight. China is winning without a fight. And understanding how that works and why America keeps letting it happen is one of the most important geopolitical questions of our time. Let's start at the beginning. The Pacific Ocean is hard to comprehend at human scale. It covers more than 60 million square miles. That is more surface area than every single landmass on Earth combined. Every continent, every country, every desert and mountain and forest and tundra added together, and the Pacific still wins. It stretches from the Arctic in the north to Antarctica in the south, from the coast of Asia to the shores of the Americas. It holds more than half of the world's ocean water. And it is not empty. Every year, more than $5 trillion in trade moves through the Pacific. The shipping lanes that cross it connect the factories of East Asia to the consumers of North America, Europe, and everywhere else. Semiconductors from Taiwan, electronics from South Korea, cars from Japan, rare earth minerals from Australia, clothing from Vietnam. All of it flows through Pacific waters. The nation that controls those waters, or can threaten to disrupt them, holds extraordinary leverage over the global economy. After World War II, the United States decided that nation would be America. And in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, America built a system to make that happen. A network of military bases, bilateral alliances, security agreements, and economic relationships that extended American power from Hawaii all the way to the doorstep of Asia. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Guam, the Marshall Islands, Palau, Micronesia. One by one, the United States established a presence on, in, or adjacent to the critical islands and nations of the Pacific, creating what strategists called a forward defense perimeter, a ring of American power that could project force deep into the Western Pacific and ensure that no hostile nation could threaten the American homeland, American trade, or American allies from the sea.
This system was not perfect. It was expensive. It required the United States to maintain a global military footprint that no other nation in history had attempted. It sometimes meant supporting governments that were more loyal than they were democratic. It required American taxpayers to fund bases and operations on the other side of the planet in places most of them would never visit. But it worked. For 80 years, the Pacific was, in every practical sense, an American lake. The U.S. Navy sailed it freely. American diplomats shaped the politics of its island nations. American aid built hospitals and roads and schools across the region. American culture, its movies, its music, its universities, its brands, its language, permeated every corner of Pacific life. When a typhoon hit, it was an American aircraft carrier that showed up first with supplies and medical personnel. When a Pacific Island nation needed a loan, it was the United States and its allies who sat across the table. The security that America provided was real. The influence that came with it was real. And for decades, most Pacific Island nations accepted that arrangement, not always enthusiastically and not without resentment at the asymmetries involved, but pragmatically, because the alternative was a world where bigger, more aggressive powers had free rein. That arrangement is now under serious, sustained challenge, and the challenger has been working at it patiently and methodically for over 2 decades. Here is something important to understand about how China approaches strategic competition. China does not think in 4-year election cycles. Chinese strategic planning operates on timelines measured in decades, sometimes in generations.
The men running China's foreign policy today were born into a country that was, within living memory, occupied, humiliated, and carved up by foreign powers. The century of humiliation, as Chinese historians call the period from the Opium Wars to 1949, is not ancient history to the Chinese Communist Party. It is the founding trauma that drives everything they do. That history shapes China's ambitions in the Pacific in a specific way. China does not simply want to be powerful. China wants to be powerful enough that no foreign nation can ever again project military force into what China considers its sphere of influence, the waters and nations of East Asia and the Pacific. China wants to push the United States back, not necessarily to destroy American power globally, but to make the Western Pacific a region where American military dominance is contested, limited, and eventually ended. And China's strategy for achieving this is elegant in its simplicity. Step 1. Build military capability inside the region, specifically by creating forward positions that didn't exist before. Positions that can be used to deny American forces access, complicate American operations, and eventually serve as the foundation for Chinese naval power projecting deep into the Pacific. Step 2. Win the diplomatic and economic competition in the Pacific Island nations that dot the ocean between China's coast and America's, so that over time, more and more of those strategically vital islands lean toward Beijing rather than Washington. Step 3. Wait for America to do what America has, with disturbing consistency, done in the past. Lose focus, cut budgets, withdraw from diplomatic engagement, and leave the room. Let's look at how each of those 3 steps is actually playing out. In 2013, satellite imagery of the South China Sea began showing something unusual. On a series of reefs and shoals in the Spratly Islands, remote, barely above water coral formations scattered across the southern part of the South China Sea, large dredging ships had appeared. They were sucking up sand and sediment from the ocean floor and depositing it on top of the reefs, day after day, month after month. The reefs were disappearing, and in their place, new land was appearing.
flat, gray, artificial land rising from the sea. China was building islands, literally, from scratch. By the time the project was substantially complete, China had created more than 3,200 acres of artificial land in the South China Sea, an area roughly the size of a medium-sized American city, constructed on top of reefs that had never before held human habitation. And on that land, China built military bases, full military bases, with everything that entails. 3 of these installations at Fiery Cross Reef, Subi Reef, and Mischief Reef received full-length military airstrips, long enough to support fighter jets, strategic bombers, and large transport aircraft. They received hardened shelters, reinforced concrete structures designed to protect advanced aircraft from missile strikes. They received anti-ship missile batteries and surface-to-air missile systems. They received deep-water ports capable of accommodating naval vessels. They received sophisticated radar systems, communications infrastructure, and support facilities for long-term operations. By 2024, satellite imagery revealed that China had begun constructing a counter-stealth radar system on one of these artificial islands, a system specifically designed to detect America's most advanced aircraft, the kind that U.S. strategic planners rely on to maintain air superiority in a potential conflict. Think about what this means. Before 2013, the waters of the South China Sea were international waters, legally and practically. The reefs China built on were disputed, yes, but they were not military installations. Today, they are Chinese military bases that sit astride some of the world's most critical shipping lanes, within striking distance of Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan. They fundamentally alter the military balance in the region. The United States protested, loudly and repeatedly. American ships conducted what the Navy calls freedom of navigation operations, sailing close to the artificial islands to assert that international law does not recognize China's territorial claims over them. China noted the protests, documented the American ships, issued diplomatic objections, and kept building. The Obama administration was presented with options for more forceful responses in 2015 and chose not to exercise them, calculating that the diplomatic costs and escalation risks outweighed the benefits. The Trump administration continued freedom of navigation operations, but did not fundamentally change the situation on the reefs. The Biden administration did the same. Year after year, the bases grew more capable and more permanent, and the United States' window to meaningfully oppose their construction closed. Today, those bases exist. They are not coming down. The ships and missiles and radar systems on them are real. And every American military planner who thinks about a Taiwan contingency or a South China Sea crisis has to factor in the threat those bases pose to American operations in the region. A former U.S. Air Force secretary put it plainly in September 2024. He said, "China is not a future threat. China is a threat today. They are building up their operational capacities specifically to prevent the United States from projecting its power into the Western Pacific." That is the American government's own official assessment.
The artificial islands are not a theory, they are a fact, and they represent a fundamental, permanent shift in the military geography of the Pacific, achieved without a single shot being fired, through patient, determined, incremental action over a decade. But China's military strategy in the Pacific is not limited to base construction. There's a second layer to it, one that is harder to see and harder to counter because it operates in the space just below open conflict. American strategists call it gray zone operations. China calls it more poetically salami slicing, the idea of taking one thin slice at a time, never doing enough in any single action to justify a military response, but accumulating advantage slice by slice until the strategic situation has been fundamentally transformed.
The most vivid example is happening right now, in real time, in the waters around the Philippines. The Philippines is a treaty ally of the United States. America is legally obligated to defend the Philippines if it is attacked, and China knows this, which is why China does not attack the Philippines. What China does instead is conduct an endless campaign of harassment, intimidation, and coercion just below the threshold of outright attack, designed to gradually push the Philippines out of its own territorial waters and establish Chinese de facto control over contested features. In 2024, Chinese Coast Guard ships regularly deployed water cannons against Philippine vessels trying to resupply their own military outpost at Second Thomas Shoal, a feature inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. They used military-grade lasers against Philippine sailors. They conducted dangerous, close-range maneuvers around Philippine ships. At Sabina Shoal, Chinese ships rammed the Philippine Coast Guard flagship 3 times in a single incident, causing significant damage. In August 2025, a collision between Chinese and Philippine vessels near Scarborough Shoal resulted in casualties. The aggression is escalating. None of these individual incidents crosses the threshold that would trigger the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty. Each one, viewed in isolation, can be framed as a maritime enforcement action, a Coast Guard operation, a dispute over fishing rights. China's lawyers can write briefs defending each incident. China's diplomats can issue carefully worded statements, and the United States is left in the uncomfortable position of repeatedly condemning Chinese behavior without being able to define a clear red line that, if crossed, would trigger a direct military response. This is the genius and the danger of the gray zone. China learns how far it can push. America learns the limits of deterrence, and the Philippines and every other smaller nation watching this unfold draws its own conclusions about whether the American security guarantee is really worth betting everything on.
Those conclusions matter enormously because they shape the choices smaller Pacific nations make about which great power to align with. Now, let's leave the military competition for a moment and talk about something that, in the long run, may matter even more: money. Specifically, China's strategic use of economic investment and development aid to build influence in Pacific Island nations. Here is the fundamental reality of the Pacific Islands. Most of them are small, poor, geographically isolated, and desperately in need of infrastructure investment. Their roads are broken, their hospitals are inadequate, their telecommunication systems are outdated, their ports can barely handle the trade they need to sustain their economies. They need schools, clean water systems, and climate adaptation infrastructure because many of these islands sit barely above sea level and face an existential threat from rising seas. The traditional providers of this investment have been the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and multilateral institutions like the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank. These partners have historically provided the bulk of development assistance to the Pacific. China looked at that situation and saw an opportunity. Beginning in earnest in the late 2000s and accelerating through the 2010s, China's Belt and Road Initiative, its massive global infrastructure investment program, extended into the Pacific. Chinese money began building things that Pacific Island governments desperately wanted built: parliament buildings, sports stadiums, hospitals, roads, ports, telecommunications networks. The deals were often structured as loans, money that Pacific governments would eventually need to repay, and the terms were not always favorable, though China disputes the characterization of its lending as deliberately predatory. What is not in dispute is the outcome. Several Pacific governments now carry significant Chinese debt, and that debt creates leverage. The most famous example of where this leverage leads is not in the Pacific, but it serves as a warning for the entire region. Sri Lanka borrowed more than $1 billion from China to build the Hambantota port in the country's south. The port was commercially unviable. It attracted almost no shipping traffic. When Sri Lanka's economy collapsed and it could not service its debt, it negotiated a deal with China that resulted in handing over the port on a 99-year lease to a Chinese state-owned company. China now operates a port in Sri Lanka, close to Indian Ocean shipping lanes, because of a debt Sri Lanka could never repay. By 2025, China's total loans to countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative had pushed past $1 trillion, and analysts were warning of a coming wave of debt crises as dozens of countries faced loan repayments they could not afford. The debt trap was snapping back on the trapper. But the leverage and the influence extracted in the meantime was real. In the Pacific, 6 governments currently carry significant Chinese debt: Papua New Guinea, Tonga, Fiji, Vanuatu, Samoa, and the Cook Islands. None of them is facing a Sri Lanka-style crisis yet, but all of them are aware of their financial relationship with Beijing when making foreign policy decisions. And the money is only part of the story. When China builds a port in a Pacific Island nation, Chinese telecommunications infrastructure often comes with it. When China builds a government building, surveillance technology sometimes gets embedded in the deal. When Chinese companies lay the undersea cables that connect Pacific Islands to the global internet, and Chinese companies now operate significant portions of the Pacific's undersea cable infrastructure, questions arise about data security and the vulnerability of those communications to Chinese intelligence gathering. This is the depth of China's economic strategy in the Pacific. It is not just about buying loyalty, though that is part of it. It is about building physical infrastructure, ports, cables, roads, buildings that serve Chinese strategic interests for decades, long after the ribbon-cutting ceremonies are forgotten. It is about building the kind of presence that has historically accompanied strategic control of a region, the ability to move ships, access information, and exert quiet pressure on governments that owe you money and whose communications run through your cables. Let me give you a concrete scorecard of how this competition has played out, country by country, because the numbers are more alarming than the abstractions. The Solomon Islands, a nation of fewer than 750,000 people, but sitting directly on the supply line between the United States and Australia. In 1993, the United States closed its embassy in the capital, Honiara. For nearly 30 years, America had no resident diplomatic presence there. In 2019, under Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare, the Solomons severed its diplomatic relations with Taiwan, which it had maintained since independence, and formally recognized Beijing. A wave of Chinese aid and investment followed. In 2022, the Solomons signed the security agreement with China that we opened this video with. Shock and alarm in Washington, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. Emergency diplomatic missions, but the agreement was signed. China was in. Kiribati, an atoll nation sitting near the equator in the Central Pacific, with a large exclusive economic zone and strategic positioning near key Pacific sea lanes. Also in 2019, immediately after the Solomon Islands switched, Kiribati severed its ties with Taiwan and recognized Beijing. Vanuatu, a Pacific island archipelago where China has built significant infrastructure, including port facilities that Australian officials have repeatedly flagged as potential naval access points. Papua New Guinea, the largest Pacific island nation, resource-rich, sitting at the northern tip of Australia, with a coast that faces directly into the Pacific sea lanes. China has been the most active.
Active external investor in Papua New Guinea's infrastructure for years. Australia has been desperately trying to counter that influence with its own investment programs. Nauru, a tiny island nation,
one of the smallest countries on Earth by land area, that briefly switched recognition to China and then back to Taiwan in 2024 after a change of government. Its back and forth illustrates just how hotly contested even the smallest Pacific nations have become. The Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands. These three nations have compacts of free association with the United States, special arrangements that give America exclusive military access to their territory in exchange for financial support and security guarantees. These compacts sit right in the heart of the strategic corridor between Asia and Hawaii, and they are the last line of American positional advantage in the Central Pacific. China has been actively working to pry them away. In 2024, China made direct cash and tourism offers to Palau in exchange for cutting its Taiwan ties and, implicitly, reconsidering its relationship with the United States. Palau refused, but the attempt was open, brazen, and entirely consistent with how Beijing operates, probing, offering, testing, looking for the lever that works. None of this happened in a single dramatic moment. All of it happened slowly, incrementally, one deal and one agreement and one abandoned embassy at a time. And that is precisely what makes it so dangerous, because by the time the cumulative effect becomes undeniable, the strategic situation has already shifted significantly in China's favor. Everything we have discussed, the artificial islands, the gray zone harassment, the debt diplomacy, the diplomatic competition in the Pacific Islands, is, in a meaningful sense, preparation for one specific contingency: Taiwan. Taiwan is a self-governing democratic island of 23 million people, located about 100 miles off the coast of mainland China. It has its own government, its own military, its own economy, its own institutions. It has operated as a de facto independent state since 1949, when the losing side of the Chinese Civil War retreated there. Beijing has never renounced its claim to Taiwan. The Chinese Communist Party considers Taiwan a renegade province that will eventually be reunited with the mainland, by peaceful means if possible, by force if necessary. Every year, China's military capabilities for projecting force across the Taiwan Strait improve. Military exercises specifically simulating a Taiwan blockade or invasion have become larger, more sophisticated, and more frequent. And Taiwan matters to the rest of the world in a way that goes far beyond its politics or its population. Taiwan produces more than 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips, the components that power everything from smartphones to artificial intelligence systems to the targeting computers in modern weapons. The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, is not just a chip company, it is the single most critical industrial facility in the global technology supply chain. If it were destroyed or captured, the entire global economy and the military capability of every major power, including the United States, would face a crisis unlike anything since World War II. Military strategists have been clear about what a Chinese move on Taiwan would require in terms of pre-positioning. China would need to be able to deny American forces access to the Western Pacific, to create what analysts call an anti-access denial environment, A2AD, that makes it too costly for the U.S. Navy and Air Force to intervene effectively. The artificial islands in the South China Sea are part of this. The Chinese missile systems in the region are part of this. The diplomatic work of pushing American influence out of Pacific Island nations, eliminating potential basing options, reducing early warning capabilities, narrowing the American strategic perimeter is part of this. This is why the seemingly trivial question of which tiny Pacific Island nation recognizes Taiwan versus Beijing is not actually about Taiwan recognition at all. It is about whether that island's port is available to resupply American forces, whether that island's airstrip can be used to extend American air coverage, whether that island's government will cooperate or stay neutral, or lean towards China. In war, geography is strategy, and China has been reshaping the geography of the Pacific, politically and physically, for 2 decades. Everything we have discussed describes external pressure on American Pacific interests, China pushing, testing, building, investing, competing. That's one part of the story. The other part is harder to talk about because it requires looking at what America has done to itself. In January 2025, the Trump administration announced the effective dismantling of USAID, an organization with an annual budget of roughly $40 billion, which had been one of America's primary tools for building relationships, influence, and goodwill across the developing world, including the Pacific Islands. 90% of its budget was cut. Programs built over decades were canceled overnight. Thousands of projects in health, education, climate adaptation, disaster response, and infrastructure development across the Pacific and beyond were frozen, suspended, or terminated. For the Pacific specifically, USAID had been directing approximately $3.4 billion per year into the region. Medical programs fighting tuberculosis and HIV, climate adaptation projects for islands literally threatened by rising seas, human resource development, infrastructure support. All of it gone.
The reaction in the Pacific was not simply disappointment, it was strategic shock. Because the United States had, in the years immediately preceding this, been making a serious effort to compete with China for Pacific influence. The Biden administration had hosted 2 unprecedented summits with Pacific Island leaders in Washington in 2022 and 2023. It had pledged roughly $1 billion in new Pacific aid. It had reopened diplomatic missions. It had made a visible, sustained effort to communicate to Pacific Island governments that America was back, that it was engaged, that it considered their relationship a priority. Then, in 2025, those commitments were frozen pending review. USAID was gutted, and, perhaps most symbolically damaging, the Trump administration imposed tariffs on essentially every country in the world, including Micronesia and the Marshall Islands, 2 of America's closest Pacific Island partners, nations that operate under special compacts of free association, specifically because of their strategic relationship with the United States. Small island economies that depend on American financial support were hit with American tariffs, the kind of treatment normally reserved for economic rivals. The message received in the Pacific was unambiguous. Not America first. The message received was, America does not see you. Now, here is the complication that honest analysis requires. China did not immediately, dramatically fill every gap that USAID left. China's total foreign aid budget in 2024 was about $3.5 billion, a fraction of USAID's former $40 billion portfolio. Beijing was not positioned financially or logistically to replace everything America withdrew overnight. And China itself was dealing with serious economic headwinds, which limited its capacity to dramatically expand its spending in the Pacific. But that misses the point. The damage done by America's withdrawal was not primarily financial. It was credibility damage. It was the signal it sent. In international relations, showing up matters. Consistency matters. The belief that a partner will be there next year, and the year after, and the year after that, that belief is the foundation of alliance relationships. Every Pacific Island leader who had to explain to their own people why the American programs were suddenly canceled had to answer a question they should never have been made to answer. Is America a reliable partner? And China, watching from the sidelines, did not need to spend a single dollar to benefit from that moment. It just needed to wait while America damaged its own credibility in a region where credibility is everything. One analyst at the Lowy Institute put it precisely.
She said, "The immediate fallout from USAID cuts in the Pacific will not be catastrophic, but over time, its absence will corrode something far more valuable than dollars: credibility. In a region where aid is shorthand for commitment, Washington's retreat signals disengagement and doubt." This is the pattern that repeats across American engagement in the Pacific: periods of attention and investment, followed by periods of distraction and withdrawal. The embassy closed in the Solomon Islands in 1993 because someone decided it wasn't worth maintaining. 30 decades later, those islands signed a military agreement with China. The line between those two events is direct and clear. There is a tendency in American coverage of the Pacific competition to portray Pacific Island nations as passive objects, prizes to be won in a game between Washington and China. That framing is wrong and counterproductive. These are sovereign nations with their own interests, their own strategic calculations, and their own very clear-eyed views of how to navigate between great powers. Most Pacific Island leaders do not want to be forced to choose between the United States and China. They want the competition. They want multiple powerful nations fighting for their favor, because that competition gives them leverage they can use to extract investment, infrastructure, climate finance, and development assistance that they would never otherwise receive, given the smallness of their economies and their lack of natural bargaining power. Solomon Islands Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare, the man who signed the security agreement with China, has consistently said, publicly and privately, that his country is not for sale, and the agreement with China does not diminish the Solomon Islands' relationships with Australia, New Zealand, or the United States. He made a calculation that having China as an additional security partner alongside the traditional Western partners increased his country's leverage and expanded its development options. Was he naive about China's long-term intentions? Possibly. Is China's interest in the Solomon Islands purely developmental? Almost certainly not. But understanding Sogavare's decision requires understanding that he was responding to a very specific failure, the failure of the United States to maintain a consistent, serious resident presence in his capital city for 30 years. Pacific leaders will work with China when America isn't in the room. They will lean to Washington when America shows up, invests, and treats them as genuine partners rather than as pieces on a strategic board. The competition for Pacific influence is not one with aircraft carriers. It is one with embassies, aid programs, trade agreements, climate commitments, and the simple, sustained act of showing up. This is the deepest irony of America's Pacific challenge. The Pacific Islands are not being conquered by Chinese military force. They are, in many cases, drifting towards Chinese influence because America has been insufficiently present and insufficiently engaged. The solution is not primarily military, it is fundamentally diplomatic and economic. And the United States in 2025 is moving in precisely the wrong direction. It would be dishonest to tell this story without acknowledging what America retains in the Pacific, because the picture is not only bleak and the outcome is not yet determined.
The United States maintains the most powerful naval force in the history of the world. American carrier strike groups remain qualitatively and quantitatively unmatched. The U.S. Air Force operates advanced aircraft, the F-22, the B-2, the emerging B-21, that retain significant capability advantages over their Chinese counterparts. American submarine forces are, by most assessments, superior to China's. The alliance network that the United States built over 80 years, while strained, remains powerful. Japan has been quietly but significantly expanding its military capability, and the U.S.-Japan alliance is as strong as it has ever been. Australia committed to the AUKUS agreement, the most significant U.S. allied defense pact in decades, agreeing to acquire nuclear-powered submarines in partnership with America and the United Kingdom.
The Philippines, despite years of ambivalent engagement under the Duterte government, has, under President Marcos Jr., moved firmly back into the American orbit, granting expanded U.S. military access to 4 additional Philippine military facilities and reviving joint patrols in the South China Sea. The Quad, the partnership among the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, has evolved from a discussion forum into a genuine strategic alignment among 4 of the world's most significant democracies, united by shared concerns about Chinese expansionism. And China itself faces serious headwinds. Its economy, after decades of explosive growth, has slowed significantly. Its property sector is in crisis. Youth unemployment has been high. The demographic consequences of its decades-long one-child policy are creating a rapidly aging population and a shrinking workforce. Its Belt and Road portfolio is drowning in bad loans. Internal political pressures on Xi Jinping, while not existential, are real. These are not the characteristics of an unstoppable juggernaut. China is a powerful, determined competitor with serious structural vulnerabilities of its own. The competition is not over. The Pacific is not lost. The American position, while weakened, is not broken. But these advantages are being squandered in ways that are difficult to watch and difficult to understand. Military superiority means less when diplomatic and economic engagement is absent. Alliances are only as strong as the commitment behind them, and that commitment is being questioned more seriously today than at any point in the last 40 years. The self-inflicted damage of USAID cuts, tariffs on treaty partners, and periodic questions about American willingness to honor its alliance commitments are doing real work eroding the credibility that underpins everything else. The window for sustaining American primacy in the Pacific is not closed, but it is narrowing. And it is narrowing not primarily because of Chinese strength, but because of American choices. There is a question underneath all of this that Americans rarely ask directly, but that is really at the heart of the Pacific competition. Is the United States still willing to pay the price of Pacific primacy? Because that price is real. It requires maintaining expensive military bases on the other side of the world. It requires funding aid programs and development initiatives in countries that most American voters have never heard of. It requires diplomats who spend careers learning the languages, cultures, and politics of small island nations with tiny economies and enormous strategic importance. It requires showing up consistently, seriously, year after year in places that don't vote in American elections and don't generate American campaign contributions. During the Cold War, the answer to that question was yes. The threat of Soviet expansion provided a framework, sometimes crude, sometimes wrong, but functional, for justifying the costs of global engagement. Americans could understand, at some gut level, why it mattered to maintain alliances and presence in remote parts of the world. That framework is gone. The Soviet Union is gone. The threat China poses to the United States is real, but different, less existential sounding, more diffuse, operating through economics and influence and gray zone harassment rather than nuclear missiles and military confrontation. It is harder to explain. It is harder to build political support for. It is easier to deprioritize. And deprioritization, in the Pacific specifically, has consequences that compound quietly over years and decades until they become crises that are nearly impossible to reverse. Here is the brutal strategic truth. The United States does not need to outcompete China in the Pacific by matching every investment dollar and every diplomatic initiative. What it needs to do is not abandon the field. It needs to maintain enough presence, enough credibility, enough consistent engagement that Pacific Island nations have a genuine choice between partners. Because as long as they have that choice, they will use it to extract concessions from both sides, which serves their interests and maintains American influence. The moment America is no longer seen as a reliable, consistent partner, the moment the question, will America still be here tomorrow, has no confident answer, Pacific Island nations will make their accommodations with China. Not because they want to, not because they prefer Beijing to Washington, but because they are small and practical and cannot afford to bet their futures on an unreliable patron. That moment has not arrived, but it is closer than it has ever been. Let me take you back to where we began. That graveyard in the Solomons. Those Marines, 19, 20, 22 years old. History is not sentimental. The fact that Americans bled on those beaches does not, by itself, create any strategic obligation. Nations do not owe each other loyalty because of blood spilled in past wars. That is not how the world works.
But those graves do represent something that matters. They represent the recognition by a previous generation of Americans that the Pacific was strategically vital. Vital enough to fight for, vital enough to die for, vital enough to build an entire global posture around controlling. That recognition was correct in 1942. It remains correct today. The Pacific matters more now, not less, because the global economy is more integrated, the shipping lanes more critical, the technology more concentrated in Pacific nations, the military competition more intense. The question is whether today's America still possesses that recognition, or whether the distance and the complexity and the smallness of the places in question have allowed a kind of strategic amnesia to set in. China's rise in the Pacific has not been the story of a dominant America being defeated by a superior rival. It has been the story of a patient, strategic competitor methodically taking advantage of the spaces, gaps, and vacuums that an inconsistent and distracted America has left open. The artificial islands exist because America decided the costs of opposing their construction were too high. The Solomon Islands signed a security agreement with China because America closed its embassy and stopped paying attention for 30 years. The aid programs that built American goodwill across the Pacific were cut because domestic political priorities won the budget argument. The tariffs were imposed on treaty partners because someone either didn't know or didn't care about the signal they sent. None of these were inevitable. All of them were choices, and choices can be made differently. The Pacific is not lost. American alliances are not dead. The U.S. Navy still sails those waters. American investment, when it appears, is still welcomed. American partnership, when it is genuine and consistent, is still valued. But the trend lines are running in the wrong direction. The competition is more serious than the American political debate acknowledges. The stakes for global trade, for regional security, for the credibility of the American alliance system, for the future of Taiwan and the technology supply chain that runs through it, are higher than they have been in decades. This is not a story about a war. It is a story about whether America still understands the price of the world it built and whether it is willing to keep paying that price. The Pacific Islands are waiting for an answer.